Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Dear respected Amir Jamaat, Missionary in Charge Sahib, Sadr Khudam, and all my respected brothers, Ansar, Khudam, Atfal, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. First of all, I just wish to express my deep sense of gratitude for this opportunity to attend today's event. It was very kind of respected Sadr Sahib to request a guest from the Markaz. And personally, I have a lot of attachment to Canada because when I started working full-time for the Jamaat in my earlier years, maybe 10, 15 years ago, Canada was a country I visited several times. I was very personally inexperienced, but I had the opportunity to learn and to gain some important lessons and experiences whilst here attending some events. I made some very good friends who I've continued to stay in touch with over the last few years. And then on this trip, even though it's been quite short, I've made some new friends and spent some time with some of the younger Khudam and Atfal. And it's been really wonderful to see the spirit amongst the young people that I've met. But in terms of a relationship with Canada or my attachment to it, of course, the most important thing or experience that I've had is that on several occasions I had the chance to be part of the Qafla when Hazrat Khalifatul Masih V, may Allah Ta'ala be his helper, was visiting Canada in 2012, 2013, and 2016. And they were a means of creating memories that certainly, I'm sure, will last me a lifetime. And beyond that, a cause of everlasting gratitude to Allah the Almighty. As I walked through Aiwan-e-Tahir earlier today, I was remembering and visualizing Hazur's visits and how he would have a constant stream of mulaqats, people would meet him. There were so many events taking place, both here in the mosque and outside at different locations. And the way so many MDs would gather along the roads of Peace Village or line the road of the mosque when Hazur was walking to the mosque for prayers. There are many special personal memories that I remembered as I was walking through those corridors as well. I remember in 2012, which was my first visit with Hazur to Canada, I think it was perhaps the last night or second to last night, suddenly and unexpectedly, one evening, Hazur called me to his residence, and I thought it was perhaps just there may be a quick query or something, but then it turned out that Hazur wished to give dictation for an address that he was giving the following day. On another occasion, I remember traveling in Vancouver and having the opportunity to see some of the most beautiful greenery that I'd seen in my life as we walked in the company of beloved Hazur. And then the 2016 visit was one where many historic events took place. I'm sure many of you will remember some of those events and have your own memories. So anyway, once again, for these reasons, it is really nice to be back here. And the warmth that I've been welcomed with has been truly wonderful, and I'm extremely grateful. Moving on to today's event, I have been asked to speak about the blessings of Khilafat. And whenever I'm asked to speak about Khilafat, it is something that consumes me with a degree of fear and trepidation. Because no matter what a person says or sees or observes, it can never truly do justice to this topic. I am well aware of the fact that so many of you are gathered here today for today's event to hear me at this time and the other speakers as well. is not because of any quality or attribute on our part. Rather, it is an expression of your love for Khilafat and your desire to learn and hear about Khalifatul Masih. Certainly for every Ahmadi, wherever they may be, the person who is our true role model and the person who works day and night for the Jamaat, for the sake of fulfilling the mission of the promised Messiah, is Khalifatul Masih. Here in Canada and in other parts of the world, I've seen for many years how Hazur is able to bring instant comfort to MDs and non-MDs, people who are in the depths of immense grief and suffering. Similarly, the way a smile or a look in their direction can reinvigorate and inspire the faith of MDs for not just weeks or months or years, but for generations. And I've also seen how, with my own eyes, how every moment of Hazur's life is spent in the defense and service of Islam, service of the Jamaat and service of humanity. And I will try to present a few incidents from now. I started my role as press secretary in 2007. And certainly it was not a role that I was in any shape or way qualified for. In fact, I did not even know that the Jamaat had a press secretary or a press and media office. And so, as I said, it was not because of any quality of mine that Hazur appointed me to a position where I would be in direct and regular contact with him. But having entrusted this responsibility for whatever reason, every step of the way, Khalifatul Masih has guided me, as he guides all the departments of the Jamaat and the various organizations that form the Jamaat's administration. There are times, sometimes in the office, where I will be sitting with members of my team, will be confused, will be confounded, discussing how to solve an issue or how to answer a certain question. And we will struggle to find the answer. But when the matter is presented to Khalifatul Masih, I've always found that the way he explains, the way he guides, is a way that fills a person with confidence. It satisfies a person's heart. It satisfies a person's mind. And it increases your faith that Allah Ta'ala is guiding Khalifa Waqt. Above all, Hazur desires for our intentions to be pure when we serve the Jamaat or in any of our activities, to be dedicated, devoted, to work hard. I recall how a few months ago, such a matter arose in my work where I was quite unsure how to handle it. And so in Mulaqat, I mentioned it to Hazur. And Hazur said in Urdu, नेक नियति से काम करो और कभी जानबूझकर किसी को तकलीफ पहुंचाने की कोशिश ना करना। अगर ये असूल रखो तो फिर बेशक किसी को तुम्हारा फैसला पसंद ना आए, कोई बात नहीं। जहाँ दूसरों को तकलीफ पहुंचाने की कोशिश करो या अपने मफादात को तरजीह देते हो, तो वहाँ फिर अल्लाह ताला की मदद और रहम से महरूम हो जाते हो। Very profound words of Khalifatul Masih. That whatever problem you face, whatever task you face, whatever question that arises, ensure that you work with good, pure and sincere intentions, and never ever seek to cause pain or distress to others. And if you maintain this principle, then even if not everyone likes or agrees with your decision, it doesn't matter. But where one person starts to seek to cause distress to others or gives priority to their own interests, there they become deprived of the help and mercy of Allah Ta'ala. Sometimes people ask me, and it's quite a common question I've had over the years, that what is it like to serve as a staff member in close proximity to Khalifatul Masih, and if Hazur ever becomes angry or upset with us. In everyday working lives, wherever people are working in employment, it's quite common that their manager or superiors will become frustrated or disappointed with them from time to time. Those of you who are in employment will probably have experienced such occasions. Of course, in terms of Khilafat, the relationship between Hazur and his staff is on a completely different level to any ordinary working professional relationship. Rather than being employees or workers, Waqf Zindagis like myself, we are servants of the Jamaat and of Khilafat. We are nothing, but the way Khalifatul Masih keeps our dignity and protects us is done in such a way that a person is left not only amazed, but he is left utterly embarrassed and ashamed at his own weaknesses in comparison to the love and grace of Hazur. And the way that Khalifatul Masih guides and treats people, those around him or the members of the Jamaat with such love and compassion, the result is that it motivates and inspires the members of the Jamaat, those who are working to strive to fulfill his expectations, to never let him down. Sometimes a worldly chief executive or a leader, he may make a point of publicly admonishing or humiliating one of his staff members, perhaps to make an example of them, to show his power, his authority before the other people in the organization. Such leaders are not governed by anything except for their own egos, and they often fail to recognize their own weaknesses, but are ever ready to demean those who work with them. But what is the example of Khalifa Waqt? As I've said, I've worked and served as press secretary for 17 years. And in that period, never once has Hazur admonished me in a public setting. Never has he, in front of others, expressed anger or disappointment, even where I have let him down or failed to fulfill my duties properly. There have been times when Hazur has held press conferences or meetings with dignitaries or other such public events where he might ask me for a reference or for a question or another question. And if on some occasions I did not know the answer or failed to respond in a coherent manner, Hazur has never once angered or expressed any displeasure. However, this does not mean that Hazur never mentions if a mistake has been made or if there is some weakness or wrong decision. There have been many times when I've been alone with Hazur in his office or elsewhere, where he has highlighted some weaknesses in my work or where I need to improve. But even then, it is never expressed with harshness, simply with a desire to help me improve my service to the Jamaat and to ensure that the responsibilities that have been allocated are fulfilled. Some people may think that because I've been working in the Markaz for a long time, that I'm now very experienced. However, inside, I know that I still feel like that very young and inexperienced person who I was when I started serving the Jamaat. And I am ever, ever grateful to Hazur's continued guidance. Just a few weeks ago, I presented a matter to Hazur, which was somewhat sensitive. And I also presented what I thought would be a suitable, appropriate way to respond or to deal with that issue. Upon hearing what I had to say, Hazur quite firmly expressed his displeasure at my suggestion. For 10 or 12 minutes, which seemed to me like an eternity, Hazur admonished me, not only about that matter at hand, but also about certain other things that had been, that I had dealt with, similar cases. Though Hazur most often will ignore or overlook our weaknesses, where he considers that something may cause harm to the Jamaat or its continued progress, there he will certainly correct and he will certainly guide. And as Hazrat Sahib said at the end of his speech, that is where it is our duty to make sure we are obedient. Anyway, that day when Hazur expressed his displeasure, I went home and I felt extremely uneasy for the rest of the evening, and all through the night I was anxious, offering istighfar. No one else in the world will have known that Hazur was displeased with my work. Yet in my heart, I knew that I had let him down, and I felt that sense of shame and embarrassment. The next day, when I reported for mulaqat, I did not intend to raise that matter again, and just thought that I would try to implement Hazur's instructions, even though there were still one or two lingering questions that were in my mind about that issue, but I did not have the courage to raise them. But when I entered Hazur's office, the first moment Hazur mentioned the case or that matter himself, and having spoken with a degree of firmness the day before, Hazur spoke in such a loving and beautiful way, and he gave guidance himself, which clarified those lingering questions in a way that made the whole situation very, very easy to follow and understand. And as I left Hazur's office, he smiled and pointed to a bag, and he said, there's some khajur, some dates, these are for you, take them with you home. I knew that that was Hazur's way of reassuring me that after the previous day, everything was okay, and that I should not be anxious anymore. This is how he guides and instructs, not through harshness, anger, humiliation, but through love, patience, and forgiveness. Certainly those who are Jamaat office bearers at any level, whether in the Jamaat or any of the auxiliaries, should seek to emulate Hazur's example of kindness, his grace, personal humility when dealing with other Jamaat workers or members. And this applies to children and teenagers as well. When you're with your families, your friends, whoever you interact with, never ever seek to cause them others distress or pain, and never allow any form of arrogance to develop within inside you or think that you are better than others. Indeed, from the very start of my waqf, one thing that Hazur has reminded me about time and time again is the importance of personal humility. In one of my first mulaqats back in 2007, office mulaqats, Hazur mentioned the revelation received by the promised Messiah that Tere Azana Rahe Usse Pasand Aaye, that in this revelation, Allah the Almighty expressed His great love for the absolute humbleness of the promised Messiah alayhi salam. Certainly, in terms of his personal character, I have witnessed Hazur's absolute humility on countless occasions, both in terms of his words and his deeds. I recall last year, the night before Jalsa Salana UK, I entered Hazur's office for mulaqat. Hazur had papers in front of him, he had his pen in his hand, and I could see that he was writing one of his addresses for the forthcoming Jalsa. And I almost felt embarrassed to be entering Hazur's office when I knew he was so consumed and so busy with the preparations for Jalsa Salana. Upon seeing me, rather than show any frustration that he is so busy, Hazur just looked up and smiled and he said, "Ke Abid, तुम थक तो नहीं गए जलसा की तकरीरों लिख कर? That have you, Abid, become tired after writing so many Jalsa speeches? At that I laughed and I said, Hazur, I do not have any speeches to write. But I'm surely praying that Allah Ta'ala gives Hazur the strength to fulfill his duties and his responsibilities and the burden that Allah Ta'ala has placed only on his shoulders. Upon this, Hazur smiled and he said, and again, it's a great reflection of his humility. He said, "Jahan par bhi mushkil pesh aati hai likhne mein, Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salam ki tahreerein hamesha meri madad karti hain. कई मैं कोट करता हूँ और कई फिर हज़रत मसीह माऊद अलैहिस्सलाम का मज़मून लेकर अपने अल्फाज में पेश करता हूँ. That whenever I'm writing or face any difficulty whilst writing my speeches, the writings of the promised Messiah alayhi salam always come to my aid. Sometimes I quote them directly, or sometimes I present the topic of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salam in my own words. On another occasion, a few months ago, I was able to observe Hazur in his office as he studied quite intently the Holy Quran for several minutes. As he ended his study, Hazur looked up at me and said, "Quran Kareem एक अजीब किताब है. हर चीज़ का जवाब इसमें है अगर गौर करो." Here, Hazur mentioned that if a person is willing to study and reflect, then the answer for everything can be found in the Holy Quran. The love of the Holy Quran was etched upon the face of Hazur as he said these words. I also enjoyed personally the way Hazur used the word ajib to describe the Holy Quran. Those of us, like myself, who have a lesser understanding and comprehension of the Urdu language, we tend to translate Urdu in its most simplest form. So we would translate ajib as strange. But if somebody asks a scholar or somebody who's much more learned, they will tell you that this word can also be used, ajib, to describe unique, astonishing, magnificent, genius, these types of words. And it was in that context that Hazur used that word to describe the Quran. And so my point is that Hazur never refers to his own knowledge or intellect. Rather, he always refers to the Holy Quran, the Hadith, the promised Messiah, alayhi salam. Before making what proved to be a very historic address in Capitol Hill in 2012, in Washington, D.C., some members of the church visited Hazur the day before. And one of them asked Hazur that, "Are you not nervous that tomorrow you are going to the center of American democracy? You're going to be meeting some of the world's most powerful and influential people, and you have to address them." What did Hazur say in response? Hazur smiled again, and Hazur said, "I'm not nervous, because I'm not going there with my own personal agenda or viewpoint. Rather, whatever I'm going to say is inspired directly by the teachings of the Holy Quran." And again, this is a lesson for all of us as well, that there is no need to be intimidated by others, no matter how impressive or powerful they may appear to be, as long as we have a firm belief in the teachings of Islam, and those teachings remain our guide at all times. And it's not easy, as young people especially, that sometimes you will face difficulties, you will face struggles. There are parts of your faith that you may have to defend before other people. Take your lead from Khalifatul Masih. Yes, certainly try to speak with wisdom and think before speaking, but never feel pressured to change or modify your beliefs to satisfy others or to fit in. I myself have grown up in the West, in the UK, just like many of you have grown up here And I was always taught that in schools or just generally in society, that Western values were based on principles, noble principles of equity, justice, honesty. Yet when we see what is happening in the world today, where it is clear that certain nations or countries are treated differently, or where people of certain races or religions are treated with a degree of contempt or prejudice, we can't help but realize that those claims of justice and equity are being rendered hollow before our very eyes. True justice in this world is seen only in the blessed guidance and words of Khalifatul Masih, where Hazur speaks and condemns the cruelties and unjust policies of Western leaders and nations. He does not leave it at that, but he also highlights the inadequacies of the Muslim nations, the Muslim countries, who are failing to act upon their religious teachings. Just 2 days ago in khutbah, Hazur mentioned that if some Western countries have pulled the funding for the United Nations Relief Agency in Palestine without any real justification, then why are the Muslim countries not fulfilling that void? Why aren't they standing up to defend their people? As I've said, it is my experience, and the experience, I'm sure, of all those who interact with Hazur, that his character and personality is one of pure humility, and he dislikes very much if he observes even a hint of arrogance or a sense of importance creeping into any Ahmadi, especially an office bearer of the Jamaat. A few weeks ago, I informed Hazur that a couple of people who I knew had mentioned an office bearer that they were working with and said that he was treating some of their colleagues with a degree of harshness and impatience. In response, Hazur very firmly said that those people who think that they are better than others or who treat others in a harsh way are deviating from the teachings of Islam. Hazur said to कुछ लोग जिनमें कुछ ओहदेदारान भी शामिल हैं को एहसास नहीं होता कि वो दूसरों को तकलीफ पहुंचा रहे हैं। वो अपनी दुनिया में रहते हैं जहाँ वो समझते हैं कि उनको ज़्यादा अकल है। Hazur continued, और कुछ लोग हैं जो समझते हैं कि जमात की तरक्की और कामयाबी उनके बगैर हो नहीं सकती। ये बिल्कुल गलत सोच है और मुझे ऐसे लोगों से चिढ़ होती है और उनकी सोबत मुझे नहीं पसंद। ऐसे लोगों को इस्तिग़फ़ार करना चाहिए और समझना चाहिए कि अगर कोई भी कामयाबी हासिल हो, ख्वाह वो ज़ाती ज़िंदगी में या जमाती तौर पर, वो सरासर अल्लाह ताला के फ़ज़ल और रहमत से होती है, ना किसी फ़र्द की खूबियों या सलाहियतों की वजह से। Hazur said that some people, including some office bearers, they do not even realize they are causing distress to others. They live in their own world where they think that they know better. Furthermore, there are some people who think that they are fundamental to the success of the Jamaat. Again, something that Sadr Sahib mentioned in his speech regarding the time of the promised Messiah and the first Khalifa. Hazur said, this is completely wrong, and I do not like the company of such people. Such people should do istighfar and realize that anything good achieved, whether in our personal lives or in the Jamaat, are due surely to the blessings of Allah and not because of the qualities or capabilities of any individual. Imagine this. Khalifatul Masih is the person who invites and desires for all Ahmadis around the world to be with him and to have that bond with him. He is saying that he dislikes the company of those who express any hint of arrogance or who thinks that the Jamaat's progress is dependent upon them rather than the blessings and grace of Allah. Moving on. It is a great privilege that sometimes over the past few years I've had this chance to travel with Hazur to different countries. And you get to see and observe how Khalifatul Masih has a unique impact upon people of different races, different cultures, different beliefs. If one of us were to say the very same words to another person, it would not have perhaps even 1% of the impact as when Khalifatul Masih utters those words and says that to an individual or a person or a group. And also, I've seen many times how Hazur, just through his personal conduct, is able to do tabligh and to have a great impact upon people who have no interest or connection with Islam. I'll give you one small example. In 2022, Hazur traveled to America, and on the flight to America, there were, of course, some flight attendants, and they had been briefed about Hazur and told by the Jamaat's organizers. Anyway, towards the end of the flight, one of the flight attendants came up to me, and he said that, please can you ask His Holiness if he needs anything? He said that I've been asking him throughout this journey if he or his wife require anything, and each time he has just said that we are fine. And so he said that perhaps he is shy, so can you ask him? And I said to him, I said that I myself have approached Hazur 2 or 3 times during the journey and asked him if he needs anything. And I received the exact same reply, that I'm fine and I don't need anything.
Narrated Takbir! Hazrat Amirul Mu'mineen! Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamil! Inni ma'aka! Inni ma'aka! Narrated Takbir!
And so the flight attendant, after hearing this, he said that sometimes, quite often on their flights, they have powerful people, politicians, dignitaries, famous people, celebrities. And he said that they do not take the time to speak to us unless they need something. But he said, but His Holiness has spoken to us several times, but he is the one person or one such person who did not need anything. And he said that the only one request that His Holiness made during the whole flight was that he did say once that please ask my staff, the Qafla members, if they need anything. And again, that is an example of the most loving and compassionate leader, and something again that when I heard, I could hardly control my emotions, and even now thinking about it. Over the years, I've witnessed many times the way in which Hazur sets aside all personal issues and even his health for the sake of the Jamaat. Here in Canada in 2016, it was a very long, I'm sure many of you remember, very intense tour. And almost every day, in fact every day, Hazur's schedule was packed in the service of the Jamaat and meeting people. With the grace of Allah, in the evenings after Isha, Hazur would invite me to spend a few minutes in his company in the guest house across the road. It was an opportunity for me to share my experiences of that particular day, who I had met, and the various events that had taken place. Hazur would also give his comments or mention about some of the sentiments of MDs. And whenever there was he had come across some MDs and their sincerity, you could see the happiness in Hazur's voice as he narrated it. Anyway, one evening, towards the end of the Peace Village part of the tour, Hazur mentioned to me in the evening that he was not at all feeling well. And he said that he had not felt well since the night before. And he said that during the night he felt that he had a severe fever and a headache and very, very weak. And he said that at one point he thought he would call the doctor. But then he said that if I stopped and didn't call the doctor. Why? Because if I had called the doctor, then of course the security people would know, the administration would find out, and the members of the Jamaat would be unduly worried and anxious, and I did not want to cause them any panic or alarm. Then during the rest of that day, Hazrat continued with his activities. And on that particular day, there was a program with Jamia Canada students, and Hazrat mentioned to me that evening that during that class, he had a very extreme throbbing headache. But he did not wish to cut the class short because, again, he did not wish to disappoint the students. And then Hazrat said that when he was walking after the class to the mosque, he said he felt so weak that he thought he was going to fall down and collapse. And Hazrat said to me, he said, कि उस वक़्त किसी तरह अल्लाह ताला ने हिम्मत दे दी. That somehow at that moment, Allah gave me the strength, because there were hundreds, thousands of people there. And I'm sure respected Amir Sahib may remember this. At that particular point, the program was such that they had kept 3 days in reserve so that Hazur could have some time for rest and perhaps have some recreation. But just before the end of the day, Hazur had instructed that those 3 days of rest were to be cancelled, and he would continue with his mulaqats and activities here in Peace Village. And so when I was hearing Hazur tell me how he had felt unwell, I asked him, I said, Hazur, you are not feeling well, and there was a perfect time now for you to get some rest and to recover. And Hazur, again, just in that beautiful way, he smiled and he said, there are so many MDs who wish to meet me. If I take 2-3 days or even 1 day rest, how many hundreds of MDs will be left deprived of that opportunity? And so it doesn't matter if I'm not feeling well.
Nara Takbir! Hazrat Amirul Mu'mineen! Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamid! Inni Maka! Inni Maka! Nara Takbir!
And so when we see such sacrifices of Khalifa Waqt, does it not require, at the very least, that we pray for him and that we strive at all times to listen to him and to be fully obedient? And of course, within the Jamaat, there are many such examples of people who have shown the height of obedience. We have a history in which many of the families of the Lahore martyrs are now living here. What great sacrifices they made. Last year in Burkina Faso, what great sacrifices our brothers there made when they knew that renouncing Ahmadiyyat would save their lives, but with pride and bravery and courage, they instead said that we are MD and we are proud to be MD, even though they knew that the result was going to be the end of their lives. Anyway, I wish the time is short, and I'm sorry I've taken up a lot of time already. These days, the situation of the world is such that many MDs ask about Hazur's views on the current world situation, geopolitics, the conflict in the Middle East. Given Hazur's comments in his Friday sermons, or on This Week with Hazur, since the 7th October attack in Israel, it is very clear that Hazur considers that the cruelties being inflicted on the Palestinian people is not only relentless, but beyond measure and beyond all forms of justice and decency. It is something that Hazur feels extremely deeply. Sometimes during mulaqats in the past few months, Hazur has himself to me mentioned some of the videos or reports that he has seen that highlight the suffering and grief of innocent children or ladies or other innocent civilians. Each time, the pain and the grief Hazur feels for all innocent people is etched upon his face and very apparent through the tone in his voice. These days, especially in the past few weeks and months, it has become very common for people to mention the risks of an escalation of a third world war, or to mention that there are many parallels with the world today as they were before the First World War or the Second World War. In fact, just a few days ago, a famous podcast in the UK with very respected journalists had a program asking, why is everyone starting to talk about World War III? It is true that the rest of the world is only now suddenly contemplating the possibility of a world war. But we Ahmadis can attest to the fact that our Khalifa has warned us about the possibilities of such a war for the past 15, 20 years. Hazur has warned us about the formation of blocs, groups of nations making opposing alliances. He wrote to world leaders many times, or several times, expressing his fears for the world. He has addressed symposiums, parliaments, expressing his fears and asking the world to take a step back and to show some sense. Each time Hazur has said that the only remedy is for the world to act with true justice. And as a religious leader, he said that he believed that this required for mankind to turn towards God Almighty. In recent times, Hazur has himself mentioned on some occasions how when he started giving these warnings 10 or 15 years ago, he was considered as a pessimist and divorced from reality. People thought that he was talking things that could never happen. Yet every word Hazur has spoken, step by step, is being proven true. And on one side, as an Ahmadi, surely this increases one's faith that Allah has divinely inspired such foresight in the Khalifa of the time. Yet on the other side, it is extremely frustrating and devastating to see how the world continually ignored Hazur's warnings. Rather than manifesting justice, the war in Gaza has shown, in far starker terms perhaps than we can ever remember, the double standards, the moral hypocrisy of many nations. It has exposed the lack of unity in the Muslim world, another issue that Hazur has spoken about for many years. And now when journalists, politicians, analysts are finally realizing the risks, the fear is that it is now too late. I do not wish to betray any personal confidences of Hazur, of what he says in the privacy of his office. But I have certainly noted a change in the tone of Hazur regarding the state of the world in the past year. Whereas before, when Hazur warned of a global catastrophe, there always seemed to be an element of hope in his tone or his words that the world powers might reform to some extent before it was too late, and that such a global war or large-scale humanitarian catastrophe could be avoided or delayed for a long period of time. Yet in recent months, as he observes the cruelties and injustices and the increasing polarization of the world, it has been my impression that Hazur's opinion seems to be that the window for a peaceful outcome is closing rapidly before our eyes, and that a major world conflict that will shake the foundations of the world that we are living in is almost sure to occur at some point. For example, a few weeks ago, after I had mentioned the latest developments in the war in Gaza, Hazur responded with a firmness and conviction that left me truly shaken. Hazur said, "मैं नहीं जानता कि ये जुल्म और नाइंसाफ़ी कब तक चलेगी, ये तो सिर्फ अल्लाह ताला जानता है, लेकिन आलमी जंग तो होगी किसी वक्त। हर चीज़ उसकी तरफ इशारा करती है और वो दुनिया के लिए बहुत बड़ी तबाही का बायस बनेगी, लेकिन उसका आखिरी नतीजा होगा कि दुनिया के सबसे बड़ी ताकतें का गरूर और तकब्बर बिल्कुल टूट जाएगा। ये होना ही है। That Hazrat said, I do not know when these cruelties and injustices will come to an end. Only Allah knows that. However, there will be a world war at some point. Everything points in that direction. It will cause misery and destruction. But the final conclusion will be that the arrogance of the biggest powers of the world will be shattered and broken into pieces. This is destined to happen. Furthermore, whilst expressing sadness and grief at the way the world has progressed, Hazrat has also said to me on several occasions that whatever happens and whatever suffering the world has to go through, ultimately there is one certainty, and that is the success and spiritual victory of the promised Messiah alayhi salam, inshallah. Following the 7th October attack and the subsequent war in Gaza, a senior Jamaat office bearer asked me to convey to Hazrat his suggestion that it may be a good time for Hazrat to write to world leaders again regarding the state of the world and urging them to again show some sense. When I presented this suggestion to Hazrat a few weeks ago, Hazrat responded by asking that have the world leaders paid any attention to the previous letters that I have sent them over several years? Some had responded with vague statements, political speak, all the while continuing upon the same course of action. Others had not even bothered to reply. Thus Hazrat said that he did not think it was worthwhile to write to them again. However, after a couple of minutes passed, Hazrat indicated to me to start writing. And over the next 10-15 minutes, Hazrat dictated 2 letters, one to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and one to the Prime Minister of Canada. Hazrat's words were extremely powerful. In terms of the letter to the Canadian Prime Minister, Hazrat spoke of how Canada had long been known as a tolerant country, and so it had been disappointing to observe that until that point, Canada had not called for a ceasefire in Gaza. Hazrat expressed in that letter how the punitive action being taken upon the whole entire population of Gaza was extreme and unjust. And he urged the Canadian government to do all they could to bring an end to the violence and bloodshed and to promote diplomacy and a peaceful solution. After the dictation was completed, Hazrat noticed that I was perhaps a little puzzled that a minute or two before, Hazrat said that there was no benefit to writing more letters, but then he had given dictation for these 2 particular leaders. And so Hazrat himself, Hazrat said and explained why. Hazrat said कि जबकि मेरे पिछले खतूत का कोई असर नहीं हुआ उनके पॉलिसीज़ पर, मैंने सोचा कि यूके और कनाडा के प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स को फिर भी लिखना चाहिए। मैं क्यों यहाँ रहता हूँ और बतौर एक शहरी इसलिए यूके के वज़ीर आज़म को लिख रहा हूँ, और प्राइम मिनिस्टर ट्रूडो को इसलिए लिख रहा हूँ क्योंकि उसके साथ और पिछले प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स कनाडा के साथ एक ज़ाती ताल्लुक़ बन चुका है, तो इसलिए कनाडा से भी एक ताल्लुक़ है। और कनाडा वो मुल्क है जिसने सबसे ज़्यादा लाहौर के शोहदा की फैमिलीज़ को रहने की इजाज़त दी है, इसलिए भी एक ताल्लुक़ कायम है। That even though my previous letters did not change the policy of world leaders, I thought that I should still write to the leaders of the UK and Canada. The reason I am writing to the UK Prime Minister is because I live here, and as a citizen, I should play my role and write to him. And the reason I've written to the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, is because I have a personal relationship with him and his predecessors. And so I have that link with Canada. And Canada is that country that has permitted the most families of the Lahore martyrs of 2010 to migrate there. And because of this, there is also a special connection. Many of your Jamaat members here, including respected Amir Sahib, have mentioned to me how you are all longing for Hazur to visit Canada again. Even if it has not been possible for Hazur himself to visit the past few years, rest assured that certainly Hazur has a strong affection and connection with this country and this Jamaat, and especially the Jamaat members. Certainly those of us who were fortunate to experience some of Hazur's previous visits to Canada cannot fail to smile when we remember some of the incidents. I recall on the previous visit, on the last night in Peace Village, after Isha, several people started gathering outside Hazur's home, his residence. First there was a trickle of a few, then a few more, then some people started doing nare, which attracted more and more people. They were all hoping and praying that on that last night in Peace Village, Hazur might come and spend a few moments with them. Late at night, I had mulaqat again in the guest house, and I mentioned to Hazur the crowds of people who were gathering outside. And it was very clear that Hazur did not have any plan from before to take a walk outside or to meet anyone. But when he heard that MDs were waiting, he said, again, I often say that smiling, and that is that beautiful smile. Hazur said, "Chalo dekhte hain," let's see. And then late at night, it must have been after 10 p.m., suddenly Hazur came out of his residence, and the excitement and passion of everybody who was present is beyond description. It was an experience that had to be experienced to be believed. As Hazur walked the streets, the dozens quickly became hundreds, quickly probably became thousands. People came rushing out of their homes or cars and ran towards Hazur. The security members, Hazur's personal security and the local security, they were panicked. But Hazur was smiling throughout, and he was happy to be amongst his people. And when I think back to that time, certainly it is my firm belief that that bond of love is truly unique and can only be established by Allah the Almighty. Furthermore, I've mentioned before how on that trip, Hazur graced the Canadian Parliament, and he had a day where he was meeting the Prime Minister. He was having lots of meetings with senior officials. Hazur was making an address in the Parliament. And at the end of a very long day, one of the MPs who was hosting Hazur asked him that, "You must be tired, and I apologize for making the day so long, but we wanted to get the most possible out of your visit." In reply, Hazur said, "In terms of hours, it was not a long day at all for me. My normal days are even longer. However, it is long in one respect, and that is because I've been away from the mosque and away from my people. While the rest of us who were there had spent the day feeling the history of Khalifa work gracing the Parliament and how excited and blessed we felt to be there, all the time Hazur was missing all of you and all the members of the Jamaat who were back in their homes or in the mosque."
Narrated Takbir! Hazrat Amirul Momineen! Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamid! Jamaat Ahmadiyya Canada! Jamaat Ahmadiyya Alamgir! Narrated Takbir!
And so, as on this Khilafat Jalsa, it's an opportunity hopefully for us to recognize how fortunate we are to have that blessing of the true Khilafat. We must never take the blessings of Khilafat for granted. I remember once there was a guest, and again it's a reflection of Huzur's humility. A guest asked Huzur that why were you chosen as the Khalifa? In response, Huzur, again with that beautiful smile, said, "This is one dilemma that I have not yet been able to solve." Huzur's comment was a reflection of his utter humility and grace. Yet every sincere member of the Jamaat is certainly witness to the fact that Huzur's personality is one of love, grace, kindness. At every moment, the world is looking towards him. We do not only listen to what he says, we see how he walks, we see how he prays, we see how he eats, how he smiles. And there is not a single facet of Huzur's life that where we can ever say that we have seen a moral failing. Yes, every person has human weaknesses, but moral failings. We have never seen his standards fall short. And so it is our duty that we remain forever attached to Khilafat. Finally, I must also mention at this point that before leaving the UK, on 2 or 3 occasions, Huzur inquired about this particular event from me. And when I mentioned that there was going to be lots of Khudam and Atfal and others attending, Huzur was very happy and very pleased. And Huzur particularly instructed that I convey his greetings of Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all of you. And that to remind you that he is always praying for the members of the Jamaat here. His love is such that I'm quite sure as well that when I return, inshallah, Huzur will inquire that how the members of the Jamaat are and how everything was. And so with these words, I once again thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity, and I apologize, I spoke for quite a bit longer than I had expected, and so I really appreciate the patience that everybody has shown. And at the end, I just pray, and I request all of you to continually pray that may Allah Ta'ala grant beloved Huzur a long and healthy life. And may He enable all of us and our children to remain forever attached to this blessed institution and this great treasure that is Khilafat-e-Ahmadiyya. Jazakallah.